Committee will come to order, and I do apologize for the delay. Strange that the Congress may be, we have burning questions and we had to talk about the baseball game. They already knew who won and who lost, but then it's beside the point. Anyway, the Subcommittee on Indian, Insular, and Native Affairs will come to order. The Subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on the following oversight topic: examining procedures regarding Puerto Rico's political status and economic outlook. Under Rule 4F, any oral statements on the hearing are limited to the chairman, the ranking member, minority member, and this will allow us to hear from the witnesses. We do have two panels there. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent all members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record. If they are submitted to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. today at the close of the hearing, whichever comes first, hearing no objections, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent the gentleman from New York, Mr. Serrano, be allowed to join us on the dais to be recognized to participate in today's hearing. Hearing no objections, so ordered. Sometime around the turn of this last century, over 100 years ago, John Green Brady, the 5th territorial governor for the District of Alaska, before Alaska was even a territory, was reflecting upon the vain struggle of Alaskans to obtain more initial self-government. The struggle of those Alaskans had lasted for nearly 40 years up to that point, leaving Governor Brady to remark, "We are graduates of the School of Patience." Even today, the words of Governor Brady still ring true when referring to American citizens who call the island Puerto Rico home. While the plight of Alaska can be charted from its humble beginnings to the department in 1867 to its progression as a district, then as a territory, and then ultimately as to admission to the 49th state of the Union in 1959, the overall journey that citizens had to endure lasted for roughly 92 years. For the past 117 years, another clock has been keeping time on the relationship between the United States and exotic land off its shores, that of the island of Puerto Rico. Since 1998, the United States of America has held in its possession the island of Puerto Rico. Since establishing self-governance of the passage of the Federal Relations Acts of 1950 and the ratification of the Puerto Rican Constitution in 1952, the United States has allowed Puerto Ricans to govern themselves in internal matters. However, Congress has maintained preliminary powers over the islands through the territorial clause of the U.S. Constitution, Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2. Today's hearings will aim to continue the discussion on the issue of Puerto Rico's political status, and important discussions given the current economic crisis the island faces itself today. For the last 8 years, the island's economy has been mired by recession, a result of misguided management policies from within the public utilities, irresponsible debt trading practices. As Puerto Rico struggles to solve an economic and financial crisis that is causing a migration of residents off the island to the mainland, Congress must consider how the island's unresolved political status is related to its economic and fiscal problems, and what legislative measures are necessary to restore Puerto Rico's financial stability. The discussion of political status for the island always sparks lively debate from Puerto Rico and among my colleagues here in Congress and on the committee. I anticipate the same here today, and I welcome it. Such spirited debate is healthy. Holding hearings such as this will further discuss and drive the point home that Congress maintains its duty to serve the Americans of the island just as we do to the Americans here on the mainland. We must show that 370 million Americans living in Puerto Rico, 307 million Americans living in Puerto Rico, that although they may not have voting representation in the House or the Senate, those of us attending this day's hearing will hear from them when they speak. It's our duty and honor to have that duty today to listen to it. On a personal level, I've been involved in this project since 1994. I believe very strongly right up front with you in statehood. That's no hidden secret. But that's up to the decision of the Puerto Rican people. But the status quo cannot exist. The fairness to Americans, the unfairness to Americans not being listened to by this Congress, and I think the responsibility to the people of Puerto Rico. A little history about this, Puerto Rico was supposed to become a state first, and Alaska slipped in, and I apologize for that. We did a good job. And then the next was supposed to be Puerto Rico, and it became Hawaii. And Puerto Rico is still waiting 117 years later to be recognized as Americans, full rights as Americans, not being punished, not being set aside and have higher health rates, and really, frankly, putting a great group of Americans that fought more and more wars per capita than any other group of people from any other state. And my goal has always been to make a decision. The status quo today will not work. Some will disagree with me, and I know that, and you're right to that disagreement. But I know what is occurring does not work. The out-migration of what I call the more talented people from Puerto Rico into the mainland is devastating. And so we have to figure something out in this Congress, and my goal is frankly, stir the pot up, frankly, to get things moving. And I want to congratulate my resident commissioner, Mr. Polisi. He's done an outstanding job presenting his points of view, and I admire his other piece of legislation, Chapter 9, that we have to look at. Every other state has that right. Only Puerto Rico does not. And we'll discuss that in the legislation. With that, I'll recognize the minority member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and buenas tardes, everyone. I apologize that it took me from the Northern Marianas a little over 500 years before I got to see my fellow people from Puerto Rico. At one time, we all owed allegiance to a queen. And it's been a long time since after that allegiance to the Queen, you became a part of the United States. But I want to begin by welcoming the witnesses to the hearing, particularly those who traveled from the island of Puerto Rico to be with us today. I also want to recognize my good friend and colleague, Luis Gutierrez from Illinois. And I think I saw Ms. Nidia Velasquez here earlier. I want to especially welcome the leaders of Puerto Rico's 3 major political parties, as well as our former Natural Resources Committee colleagues, congressmen and former governors, Luis Fortuno, Anibal Acevedo Vila, and Carlos Romero Barcelo. Today's hearing will examine the link between the current economic conditions on Puerto Rico and the unresolved issue of the island's political status. I believe such an examination is fitting given the severe fiscal difficulties the island is facing. Currently, the government of Puerto Rico is $73 billion in debt, and there are real concerns that the central government or one of its instrumentalities may soon default on its bond payment. I am from the Northern Mariana Islands, which is a commonwealth that has a permanent relationship with the United States. When Puerto Rico becomes a state, we're next in line, because we start first with the commonwealths and then we deal with the others. That's a joke, okay? It's a joke. We have to lighten up the room. But that makes sense. No, the commonwealth status in the Marianas was derived from looking at the Puerto Rico status model also. Puerto Rico and the Northern Marianas have a long history, like I alluded earlier. We were a part of Spain just prior to the Spanish-American War, but prior to the covenant approval between the United States and the Northern Mariana Islands, the Political Status Commission had to decide the future political status for all the people of the Northern Mariana Islands. And this was no easy feat for the Pacific Islanders, for a group of Pacific Islanders who's had been colonies for hundreds of years, and by an act of political self-determination, we chose a permanent relationship with the United States. We also had a plebiscite to decide whether we wanted to vote for Commonwealth status or reject it, with the caveat to participate in the determination of an alternative future political status. We had one. This Puerto Rico, I think, will have 5 or 6 to reach that decision. I strongly believe that the people of Puerto Rico should similarly be given the opportunity to exercise their right to establish a permanent, unalterable relationship with the United States, or to become an independent country, controlling their own political and economic affairs. Puerto Ricans have voted in at least 5 plebiscites since they ratified their local constitution in 1952. The most recent, in 2012, saw statehood winning a majority for the first time. In view of this result, which saw statehood receiving 62% of the vote and the current status being rejected by 54% of voters, my colleague, Congressman Per Luisi, introduced H.R. 727, the Puerto Rico Statehood Admissions Process Act. H.R. 727 would authorize a federally sponsored vote to be held in Puerto Rico by the end of 2017, with the ballot containing a single question: shall Puerto Rico be admitted as a state of the United States? And as a co-sponsor of the Puerto Rico Statehood Admissions Act, I am persuaded that the island's territorial status is a cause of its economic conditions. The unequal treatment in federal funding currently experienced by Puerto Rico would be transformed into billions of dollars every year under statehood, which would be used to booster and transform the Puerto Rican local economy for the people of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico's status is also the reason its municipalities, such as the Puerto Rico's Electric Power Authority, cannot adjust their debts under Chapter 9 of the Federal Bankruptcy Code if they become insolvent. States can choose to allow the municipalities to file for protection under Chapter 9. However, Puerto Rico's government was not authorized to permit its municipalities to seek Chapter 9 bankruptcy relief when Chapter 9 was established by Congress in 1982. And Mr. Chairman, I look forward to working with you to pursue a solution to the unfair and unequal situation that our fellow Americans in Puerto Rico. It's high time we reach a consensus on a path forward for Puerto Rico to permanently resolve their political status. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your...
I thank the gentleman. We now, I believe our first panel has been seated. We have the Honorable Pedro Parisi, Resident Commissioner, Cesar Mandera, Attorney General for Puerto Rico, and the Honorable Ruben Barrios, President of Puerto Rican Independence Party. Honorable Commissioner, you're up.
Thank you. Chairman Young, Mr. Ranking Member, and members of the subcommittee. The facts are as follows. Puerto Rico is a territory. If it does not wish to remain a territory, it can become a state or a sovereign nation, either fully independent or with a compact of free association with the U.S. However, if Puerto Rico becomes a sovereign nation, future generations of island residents would not be American citizens. My constituents have made countless contributions to this nation in times of peace and war, serving in every military conflict since World War I. Many have made the ultimate sacrifice. When they do, their casket is flown back to this country, draped in the American flag. It takes real patriotism to fight for a nation you love, but one that does not treat you equally. Puerto Rico has more U.S. citizens than 21 states, but my constituents cannot vote for president, have no senators, and have a non-voting delegate in the House. Moreover, the Constitution gives Congress license to treat territories worse than states, and Congress often uses that license. Territory status is the root cause of the crisis in Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico is treated unequally under federal programs. It is deprived of critical economic support. To compensate, the Puerto Rico government has borrowed heavily, which helps explain why the government and its instrumentalities have $72 billion in debt. In recent years, 250,000 island residents have relocated to the states, and these numbers are only growing. Once in the states, they're entitled to full voting rights and equal treatment under the law, rights they lack in Puerto Rico. Let me mention two of the many ways that Puerto Rico's status hurts the quality of life of my constituents. First, Puerto Rico is treated unequally under Medicaid and Medicare. The impact on our healthcare system and on our fiscal health has been severe. Second, Congress has authorized each state government to permit its insolvent municipalities to adjust their debts under Chapter 9 of the Bankruptcy Code, but has not authorized Puerto Rico to do so. Thus, territory status is a significant reason why Puerto Rico has excessive debt, and the sole reason why it lacks a critical tool to manage that debt. I have introduced bills to give Puerto Rico equal treatment under federal health programs and Chapter 9. While I appreciate that the governor of Puerto Rico has endorsed these efforts, it is ironic that an anti-statehood administration is seeking state-like treatment for the territory in key policy areas. I seek equal treatment for Puerto Rico in all respects. If you give us the same rights and responsibilities as our fellow American citizens, and let us rise or fall on our merits, we will rise. But if you continue to treat us like second-class citizens, don't profess to be surprised when we fall. This is now the predominant view in Puerto Rico. In a 2012 referendum, a majority of voters rejected territory status, and more voters expressed a desire for statehood than any other option. At my initiative, Congress approved funding for a federally sponsored referendum. Once I have the opportunity, I will use this funding to hold a vote on whether Puerto Rico should be admitted as a state, just like Alaska and Hawaii did. This is logical. Statehood won the 2012 referendum, so we should now vote on statehood itself. This is also fair. Those who support statehood can vote yes, and those who oppose it can vote no. This approach has broad support in Congress. I have introduced a bill to authorize a vote in Puerto Rico on whether the territory should be admitted to the Union. If a majority of voters say yes, Puerto Rico would become a state within 5 years. The bill has 109 co-sponsors from 39 states and territories, more bipartisan backing than 99% of bills filed this year. Each co-sponsor refutes the cynical argument that the U.S. would not accept Puerto Rico as a state. Puerto Rico's status is intolerable, and my constituents will no longer tolerate it. We want equality under the American flag, and we will settle for nothing less. Thank you.
Well done. Cesar Miranda, Attorney General of Puerto Rico. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman Young.
Turn that mic on.
Thank you, Chairman Young, members of the subcommittee. My name is Cesar Miranda. I am the Secretary of Justice of Puerto Rico. I am appearing today representing the Governor of Puerto Rico. I'm not representing the Popular Democratic Party, but the Governor and his executive capacity. We have been invited to discuss an issue over which there is no consensus in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico's political status is a divisive matter both in Puerto Rico and in this Congress. I recognize the importance of this historical debate. However, given today's fiscal and economic crisis in Puerto Rico, I prefer to direct my testimony to address other matters of urgent importance of our island. The fiscal and economic situation in Puerto Rico has reached a tipping point. We are in a state of fiscal emergency as we have no access to the capital market and our public institutions face a liquidity crisis. The situation is truly dire. Puerto Rico has been experiencing an unemployment crisis. Unemployment remains twice that of the mainland, and the loss of employment opportunity has caused an increasing number of residents to move to the mainland. Nearly half of all residents in Puerto Rico qualify for low-income health insurance subsidies, and the average personal income per capita was only $17,000 in fiscal year 2013. Puerto Rico's unprecedented economic difficulties have contributed to rising budget deficits that have turned into large debts. Puerto Rico owes approximately $73 million in debt, and it has no ability to refinance it. I believe that there are certain issues that this Congress can explore to address Puerto Rico's fiscal crisis and put Puerto Rico on a path of long-term fiscal sustainability. First, the Congress can approve H.R. 870, which is introduced by Resident Commissioner Pierluisi earlier this year. H.R. 870 would amend the U.S. Bankruptcy Code and extend Chapter 9 to Puerto Rico. Extending Chapter 9 would provide significant benefits to all involved. Chapter 9 would provide a process that is understood by creditors, prospective lenders, and suppliers. It would facilitate market access by offering debtor in possession financing. There is no good reason to deny Puerto Rico Chapter 9 in what has been proven time and again to be a vital tool for recovering from dire economic consequences. Detroit is the last of those examples. Second, Congress can provide Puerto Rico with relief from the Jones Act, which drives up the cost of all goods in Puerto Rico and depresses the Puerto Rican economy. Congress could even grant Puerto Rico a temporary exemption of the Jones Act in order to evaluate its impact on the economy before granting a permanent exemption. Third, Congress needs to fix future reductions in federal health care funding that will harm Puerto Rico residents. These reductions are not in line with the funding treatment received by the 50 states, and they threaten the health and welfare of Puerto Ricans. It also threatens economic stability. Specifically, I understand that a further reduction will occur when the 2016 Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services rate structure becomes effective. This will cut Medicare funding by 11% in Puerto Rico, while increasing by 3% on the state in the mainland. This cut will compound the financial difficulties for Puerto Ricans who pay the same Social Security and Medicare taxes as residents. There are some other examples in which Puerto Rico can be assisted by Congress. There is a widespread consensus in Puerto Rico on the approval of H.R. 870 to amend the U.S. Bankruptcy Code. In addition, there is consensus in crafting an exemption from the Jones Act and amending the sunset provision of certain health care funding. This is basically my pronunciation regarding the opinions of today.
Thank you, sir. Ruben Barrios, former senator, Puerto Rican Senate, you're up. Independence Party.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, the virtual bankruptcy of Puerto Rico's economy is a self-evident reality. Puerto Rican voters have repudiated the territorial status that is the root cause of our economic and social problems. A territorial status that was never democratic has now become tyrannical. Internationally, the community of Latin American and Caribbean states has recently reaffirmed its support for the right of Puerto Rico to its self-determination and independence. And yet, Congress refuses to comply with its decolonizing obligation towards Puerto Rico. This subcommittee is well aware of Puerto Rico's status problem. For decades, it has held hearings on the issue, and many in Puerto Rico can reasonably wonder whether this oversight hearing pursues a legitimate legislative purpose or is merely a pro forma partisan quid pro quo. Only time will tell. I shall utilize this hearing to publicly propose a route map towards the solution of Puerto Rico's status problem. The relationship between Puerto Rico's territorial status and our economic and social problems has been well summarized by Senator Ron Wyden, chairman of the Committee of Energy and Natural Resources. I quote, "Puerto Rico faces huge economic and social challenges. The lack of resolution of Puerto Rico's status not only distracts from addressing these and other issues, it contributes to them. As the most recent reports from the President's Task Force on Puerto Rico status found, and I quote, identifying the most effective means of assisting the Puerto Rican economy depends on resolving the ultimate question of status, and I end quote. Senator Wyden further added, the present relationship undermines our moral position in the world. To say that Puerto Rico should first decide what it wants, as President Obama has proposed, is merely an excuse to evade the legal responsibility of the United States as a colonial power, particularly when the President insists that the territorial relationship already repudiated by the Puerto Rican electorate should be one of the options. Colonialism is the problem, not the solution. We therefore propose the following process to resolve Puerto Rico's status problem. Puerto Rico and the U.S. Congress should engage in a collaborative process of self-determination for Puerto Rico. In Puerto Rico, various proposals have been advanced to initiate a process. The party I preside, for example, has proposed a status assembly in which each status option, proportionally represented, would formulate a proposal for its desired non-colonial, non-territorial option, requiring a response by the U.S. government by a date certain. Ultimately, only realistic non-territorial options negotiated with the United States authorities would be submitted to the Puerto Rican electorate. Unfortunately, the present government of Puerto Rico refuses to move in this direction. However, Congress could jumpstart a process directed towards the same end. Bipartisan representatives of the congressional leadership, in coordination with the executive branch, could convene representatives of the different status alternatives to present their respective decolonizing status proposals. In response, Congress would then specify which alternatives and under what conditions it would be willing to consider. The Puerto Rican people could then cast a meaningful vote for the available non-colonial, non-territorial options. If Congress takes no action and the colonialist PPD prevails in Puerto Rico's 2016 election, the democratic bankrupt territory of extreme dependency will continue to build support for statehood. If the pro-statehood party prevails, Congress will then be faced with a statehood petition as a consequence of a statehood yes or no vote. That vote would be totally uninformed as to the conditions that Congress would impose, and driven principally by the widespread notion that statehood represents an endless cornucopia of federal funds. You would then be faced not only with the economic crisis in Puerto Rico, but with a political crisis of unforeseeable consequences in the United States. The rational way to avoid such a scenario would be to start a collaborative process of self-determination. Time is running out. To conclude, I must urge and demand of the President of the United States the immediate release of political prisoner Oscar López Rivera, who has been in prison for more than 34 years here in the United States. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Are you ready? Questions? I'll raise the minority leader for questions. You have questions? Ms. Torres, go ahead. You're right. You're first up now. You're getting closer. You keep it up, we'll be hugging pretty quick. Oh, that sounds good. Go ahead.
Anything that gets me closer to you, Chairman, would be a wonderful thing. And thank you for allowing me to come before my colleagues. My question would be to Mr. Miranda. Do you think that Puerto Rico's territory status is the cause of Puerto Rico's economic and fiscal problems, or just a contributing factor? Or do you think that the issues are totally distinct?
First, let me qualify the concept of territorial status that the present government do not accept as so. And Commonwealth has been defined in other nature of legal and constitutional relationship with the United States. But nonetheless, I don't want to expand too much on that. The critical economic circumstances that we are facing in Puerto Rico are the consequence of many years of perhaps overspending. We have to admit that in some cases we should have been much more careful, but nonetheless, in some way, the island has been dealing with some difficulties to deal with that sort of economic condition. For instance, every state has the right to resort to a law that allows Chapter 9 of the law to be implemented. Therefore, any municipality in any state can resort to it. Somebody has called or has said that Puerto Rico wants to have a bailout. Puerto Rico is not interested in having a bailout by approving HR 870 and extending Chapter 9 to Puerto Rico.
I have one more question, so let me stop you there. And my next question would be to Mr. Barrios. I want to make sure I'm getting both of my questions on the record. We can follow up. Puerto Ricans are leaving the island in huge numbers, and they're immigrating to the States. They're not necessarily leaving to other countries. In light of this, do you believe Puerto Rico's economy would perform better as a sovereign nation or as a state?
Well, I must correct you. It's Mr. Berrios.
Oh, Barrios, disculpa.
No hay problema. Of course, I think the island economy would be much better off as a republic, because we would then have the tools necessary, the powers necessary to diversify our economy, to protect our production, to enter into tax-sparing and other treaties with other nations, to buy in cheaper markets. For a number of reasons, I could keep on enumerating them. Now in Puerto Rico, we've been under depressive conditions for the last, since 2006, we've gone down 13% in our gross domestic product, 13%, we've shrunk. And since 1970, we've been practically stagnated. This political status does not produce prosperity for the people of Puerto Rico, and we need the necessary tools to enter into the world market, keep on with the commerce with the United States, but have in our hands the means, as every other nation in the world does, including the United States, to promote its own economy. And the only way to do that is through the powers of independence.
As a sovereign nation.
As a sovereign nation, of course. I would pose the following rhetorical question to you. If independence is so bad, why do we have more than 200 and some odd independent countries, including the United States, and only one territory?
Thank you, sir. I'm not here to answer questions. I'm here to ask them.
Thank you, Ms. Radomin. How do you pronounce your name?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
I, too, want to welcome the panel of distinguished witnesses, the first panel. I have a question for Congressman Pierre Luisi. Some pro-statehood advocates in Puerto Rico argue that Puerto Rico already voted for statehood in 2012 and should not have to vote again. You have pointed out the following. When Alaska and Hawaii were territories, they each held votes sponsored by the local government in which voters expressed a desire for statehood. Ultimately, Congress approved an admission act for Alaska in July 1958 and an admission act for Hawaii in March 1959. Now, those acts of Congress provided for admission to occur once a majority of voters affirmed in a federally sponsored vote that they desired statehood. So you are essentially proposing the same procedure for Puerto Rico as was used in Alaska and Hawaii, right?
You're absolutely right, Madam Congresswoman. That's exactly what we're doing. We are following the path of Alaska and Hawaii. In both territories, former territories, there were locally organized plebiscite. If I recall correctly, in Alaska, about 57% of the population supported statehood. And many years later, you finally got it. Alaska finally became a state. But when Congress decided to legislate the admission of Alaska, it was conditioned upon a vote by the people of Alaska, basically ratifying the admission. And the vote happened, and to no surprise, then a much bigger majority of voters in Alaska supported the admission and became a state. The same happened in Hawaii. In Hawaii, if my recollection serves me right, the plebiscite result was in the 60s, about 67% or so. And years later, the same process happened. It was coincidental, very close to the time when Alaska came in.
Would the gentleman cease for a moment? Whoever's got that cell phone in this room, you better shut it off. I'll ask you to leave. It's impolite to have a cell phone on at any time.
So why am I proposing an up or down vote on the admission of Puerto Rico as a state? Simple. In 2012, a majority of the people of Puerto Rico, 54%, rejected the current status. And more people voted for statehood than any other option, including the current status. Given that scenario, the next logical step should be a vote on statehood. We had a yes or no in 2012 with respect to the current territory. Why not have one with respect to statehood? Anybody supporting statehood could vote yes. My colleagues here probably in all likelihood would vote no for whatever reasons. If you support independence for Puerto Rico, you would vote no. If you want Puerto Rico to be a sovereign nation with a compact of association with the U.S., you could vote no. So that's what I'm proposing. It is fair. Nobody can say they would be excluded. All the voters in Puerto Rico could express themselves, and that's my position. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
My good friend from Guam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for your leadership on addressing these issues that are so very important to the territories. I welcome our former colleagues, the governors and the mayors and the other leaders from Puerto Rico. It's very nice to have you here with us in this very important hearing. And I also commend Mr. Pierluisi, who has worked diligently to advance self-determination efforts and who champions Puerto Rico's issues here in Congress. Like our brothers and our sisters in Puerto Rico, the people of Guam aspire to determine our political future and fully exercise our right to self-determination. I commend Puerto Rico's local leadership for their efforts to determine their political status, and I have urged local leaders on Guam to make similar efforts so that we can move forward with our self-determination. But this process is twofold. Congress holds the institutional obligation to address the political status and Puerto Rico and the other territories under Article 4 of the Constitution. So I urge this committee to give due consideration to the views of the people of Puerto Rico on this issue. My first question is to you, Mr. Pierluisi. You have argued that Puerto Rico's economic challenges make self-determination even more urgent now. You are an ardent advocate for statehood for Puerto Rico. If statehood vote were selected by the voters and Congress approves it, how could statehood address Puerto Rico's difficult economic situation, which is the case now?
Well, the fact is that Puerto Rico has been lagging the states now for over 4 decades. Ever since the 1970s, Puerto Rico's unemployment on average has been 5% more than in the mainland. Ever since the 1970s, our growth has been lagging the one in the mainland. We've been behind. Income per capita, the GDP per capita in Puerto Rico, consistently has been about 1/3 the average in the States and 1/2 the one for the poorest state, Mississippi. So it's pretty obvious to me. And let me add one thing, an additional fact, which is very important. The debt that we're talking about, $72, $73 billion, it piled up under the current status. So it is pretty obvious to me that the common element here is that the current status is not working as a platform for Puerto Rico's economic development, for our quality of life. To add insult to injury, our island is losing population like never before. 250,000 American citizens hopping on a plane and moving to the States to have the rights and the opportunities and the jobs they don't find in Puerto Rico. Actually, they're voting with their feet, because once they move to the States, they can vote for the president, they can elect members of Congress, and they have equal rights in federal programs, which we don't have in Puerto Rico. Now, why would statehood be good for Puerto Rico? Well, let's talk about Hawaii and Alaska. In both Hawaii and Alaska, you had growth, additional growth once they became states. Let's talk about the fact that Puerto Rico's status, by its very nature, is not stable. It's insecure. There's political risk in Puerto Rico. So statehood is a permanent status. It is a stable status, which will be very attractive in terms of attracting additional investment to the island. And when we talk about federal funding, because of the disparities we face, Puerto Rico would be receiving billions of additional funding that would flow into our economy if we become a state. The bill I have introduced proposes basically a 4-year transition period, because the parity in federal programs would happen gradually, as well as the taxes that would have to apply in Puerto Rico. You could phase them in as well. So this wouldn't happen overnight, but I am sure that once we put Puerto Rico on the path to statehood, we will grow, we will have a better quality of life, and our people will stay in Puerto Rico.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I have another question. Are we going to make a second round, or?
I will let you ask it now.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This one is for Mr. Miranda. Last year, Congress appropriated $2.5 million to Puerto Rico for a new plebiscite to resolve Puerto Rico's political status. Now, I understand that the DOJ must approve the expenditure plan, ensuring that the plan is compatible with the Constitution and laws and policies of the United States. Has a plan been submitted, and would such a plan be compatible with the U.S. laws and policies?
The plan seems compatible with the U.S. law, as you just said. And my understanding is that there was a process for defining the status that we're going to be participating on a referendum. That definition had to be approved by the Secretary by the Attorney General of the United States. Where do the process stands now? I really do not know, but I understand that at some point the governor of Puerto Rico was getting involved in some conversations with the Department of Justice to address that point and to have organized the process in Puerto Rico for that event to take place. I cannot assure you at this moment what is the actual state of that initiative that was very much welcome in Puerto Rico.
Thank you very much for the information, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Do you want to ask questions? What do you do? I recognize the ranking member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome again, everyone. This panel, let me get something straight. This panel consists of the heads of 3 political parties in Puerto Rico. Is that correct? Mr. Pierluisi is president of the New Progressive Party. The Minister of Justice is a Popular Democratic Party.
May I?
And Mr. Berrios, sir, is the president of Puerto Rico Independence Party? That's correct.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, but let me clarify. I'm appearing here as a representative of the governor as on its executive functions. The governor is also the president of the Popular Democratic Party in Puerto Rico, but I'm not representing him on that particular position. So therefore, I'm not here representing the Popular Democratic Party. I'm here appearing just as a representative of the governor in his executive level.
So what then are you doing here if you didn't get invited? We invited the president of the Popular Democratic Party.
I understand that.
Why are you here?
I tell you, I explain you. I'm here because the governor was invited in two different categories. He was invited as governor and he was invited as president of the Popular Democratic Party.
We made the invitation. We should know who invited, and I think maybe you misunderstood, but we certainly don't misunderstand who invited. Can I ask you a political question then?
You invited the governor of Puerto Rico, and I appear in here representing the governor of Puerto Rico on his capacity as governor, not on his capacity as president of the Popular Democratic Party.
Yeah, because now my question, I'm confused now because my questions are directed to you.
But you can direct the question to me, and I decide if it is.
No, you don't have to decide when to answer, sir. If you came here, I'm assuming you came here as a head of the party, but you don't just come here. I mean, this is by invitation only.
I understand that.
So let me ask you, because the governor was invited to testify, then you agree with that at least, right? About Puerto Rico's political status and the connection between that party, the island's territorial status, and its economic problems. And let me ask you something, because let me make it very clear. You want Chapter 9 for Puerto Rico, right? You think it benefits Puerto Rico?
I do Chapter 9 of the bankruptcy law for Puerto Rico.
You agree with that, right?
As Attorney General, I assure you that that will be very helpful to Puerto
that
Rico.
Chapter 9 is allowed for states.
Well,
States, the 50 states have the privilege of Chapter 9.
right, that's true.
Okay, so you don't want to be a state, but you want what belongs to a state,
Well, I'll tell you,
right?
that could happen. Puerto Rico, as a Commonwealth, can be treated differently from states, but again, there are many other rights exercised by states that are also being granted to Puerto Rico. So why is there a difference regarding Chapter 9?
That's not just
I do not
Puerto Rico.
understand
That's
that
not
difference.
exclusive to Puerto Rico. That is also to the other territories, including the Northern Marianas. But you want something that is a privilege extended to the 50 states. And you want that for Puerto Rico, but you don't want Puerto Rico to be a state. You're holding on also, I
I'm not going
understand,
to
your
answer-
government.
no, excuse me one second. I'm not
You
going to
represent
answer
the
whether I
government, you're
want Puerto
holding on
Rico
to
to be a state or
$2.5
not.
billion that we appropriated for a plebiscite, an straight up or down question on whether Puerto Rico should favor statehood, Puerto Ricans favor statehood. You haven't had that plebiscite. We gave you the money, so it's no longer a question of money. So why don't you have that plebiscite?
I explain,
Are you
sir.
waiting for?
I explain, sir, that I'm appearing here just
Mr.
to
Chairman, who's not going
delineate.
to answer my question? I yield back.
Thank you. Well, I got the ranking member and the ranking member. Which one is the ranker? He's the ranker?
We were both
Okay, both rankers? Okay. All right, Mr. Grom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very kind of you, and thank you for holding the hearing and welcoming all the witnesses and former colleagues that are here with us today, and the sponsor of two pieces of legislation, our colleague on the committee, Mr. Pierre Luisi, who has worked long and hard in dealing with both the economic reality and challenges that are facing Puerto Rico now, as well as, you know, an upfront piece of legislation that calls for a vote on the status and the statehood status, the Puerto Rico Statehood Admission Act, using the money that appropriated previously as the source for the election cost and the promotion of that. The other one I think is very important, that submitted 870, because it's about equal treatment. And until the other issue in terms of status and jurisdiction are settled, I think it's an important piece of legislation because it talks about status. You know, the 11% cut in Medicare only on the island, that is not an appropriate response to the economic crisis, allowing allowing Chapter 9 bankruptcy for state-owned, whether it be power or other authorities, and allowing the government-owned companies as well as municipalities to use Chapter 9, as would be the availability to any community or publicly owned company here in the mainland. So I want to thank the gentleman for that. I have a long, beautiful statement, 10 pages, Mr. Chairman, that I will submit for the record.
I gladly have you submit
Thank
it
you.
for the record. Are you through?
I am through. I yield back. Thank you, sir.
Now, Dr. Reyes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, our territories are a part of our nation. Their residents are a part of our nation, and in fact, by an act of Congress, they are American citizens. And yet, too often, our territories are left behind in major federal legislation. The result of this inequality comes in the form of health disparities, severe income inequality, and in some cases, substandard living conditions. For example, territory residents who have paid into the Medicare system do not have access to the same benefits they would be due as a state. The statistics on the disparities in Puerto Rico specifically are appalling. According to Puerto Rico's Medical Licensing and Studies Board, the number of physicians in Puerto Rico has dropped by 13% in the last 5 years, contributing to the severe primary health professional shortage in 34 medical underserved areas across Puerto Rico. Compared to the states, Puerto Rico has less than half the per capita rate of emergency medicine physicians, which oftentimes serve as the individual's last safety net resource. And the reimbursement rate for physicians practicing on the island is set to go down, even further exacerbating these disparities. The people of Puerto Rico deserve to have access to the health care services that they have paid for and deserve the opportunity to lead a healthy, full life. And so I would like to ask a question if we have enough the time. And so this question is for my colleague, Representative Pierre Luisi. How does Puerto Rico's territory status specifically harm the health and wellness of Puerto Rico's residents?
Thank you so much, Mr. Ruiz, and I'll try to be brief and get to the point. Actually, the situation we're facing is very similar when we talk about all the territories. The life of a territory is the life of American citizens in most. I understand that in American Samoa we're talking about nationals, unfortunately so. But we do not get equal treatment in federal programs, including in federal health programs. And that translates into worse quality of life for our people, particularly our vulnerable population. What happens, for example, in the Medicaid program is that for years, the U.S. government was assuming roughly about 18 to 20% of the cost of Puerto Rico's Medicaid program, up to the Affordable Care Act. When the Affordable Care Act came about, I worked hard, as well as my fellow delegates from the territory, so that The federal government would enhance the funding we get, but we're still short-rifted. At the moment, Puerto Rico, basically the U.S. government is assuming 50% of the cost of our Medicaid program, but not resembling your Medicaid program. In Puerto Rico, to give you an example, we afford a health insurance to people up to roughly 80% of the U.S. poverty level. In the mainland, as you know, through Medicaid expansion is getting to up to 134% of poverty level. So the federal government is not giving us, not even parity, equal treatment for the population we have under the 100% of poverty level. So to me, that is atrocious. It is unacceptable. These are American citizens, vulnerable American citizens, and the U.S. government is not even funding.
So you have 1 minute. What's the solution?
The solution, I have a bill before this Congress proposing to fix all these disparities we have in Medicaid, Medicare, which you refer to, in a pragmatic, realistic way. Let's say that just the Medicaid disparity is fixed. You're talking about roughly $1.2 billion that Puerto Rico, the government of Puerto Rico, is spending right now that the federal government would be spending. When we talk about fiscal issues in Puerto Rico, that in and of itself would solve the budget deficits that Puerto Rico has been dealing with and would allow Puerto Rico to make the necessary contributions to its state pension system. So talk about the life of a territory. We are always lacking federal funding, not to talk about lacking voting rights. Because as I've said before, we don't vote for the president. Puerto Ricans have only me, a resident commissioner. I can debate, I can speak, but I cannot vote on the floor. And I represent 3.5 million American citizens. That's not democratic. That is embarrassing. So that's the situation. It definitely would help for you, for the Congress, to treat Puerto Rico fairly, at the very least in federal health programs.
Well, as a physician, I care very much in reducing those disparities and ensuring that the citizens in Puerto Rico have the opportunity to live a life of wellness and a long, prosperous life as well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mbalfa? Commissioner, in your proposal with the new plebiscite, you say you have 5 years. On that plebiscite, what would happen if you had the plebiscite and if the people of Puerto Rico voted for statehood that was automatic then?
Well, there are two pieces of legislation. There are two pieces of legislation at issue. You have the appropriation that we approved, providing $2.5 million for a federally sponsored plebiscite in Puerto Rico. The legislation speaks of having a vote to resolve the status issue. And it requires that the Attorney General of the United States basically bless whatever option is posed before the electorate. We don't want to waste time. We want to make sure that whatever the people vote on is something real, something possible.
What I'm leading up to,
yes,
the present legislation doesn't have, that's not finite. What if they vote for it, there's another step. What if we were able to put something in the legislation, say if they vote for it, you become a state?
That's what H.R. 727 does. My bill, which has 108 co-sponsors, including me, 109, basically has a two-step process. You have an up or down vote on the admission of Puerto Rico as a state, and if a majority of the people support the admission, then it triggers the transition into the admission.
Okay.
And depending on when the vote takes place, what the bill provides for is the admission of Puerto Rico at the latest in January 2021. We would be voting for president in the elections of November 2020, and we would be electing our members of Congress in November 2020. And until then, Congress would be conforming the laws, federal laws, so that Puerto Rico receives the same treatment states do.
This is a question of the total panel, and like I said, I've been involved in this for a long time because we were the leaders of the state recently, and then Hawaii, and then, of course, Puerto Rico. When we first got started in 1994, I warned at that time that status quo would not prevail, and in fact, you would be in economic problems. If we don't do something in the Congress, 20 years from now, I'll start with you, Commissioner. Where do you see Puerto Rico?
Quality of life is deteriorating incredibly fast. I see a bright future for Puerto Rico because of the potential, the capacity of our people, but we cannot keep losing them. The current status is not providing them with the necessary quality of life, the necessary jobs and opportunities. And Congressman Ruiz was talking about doctors. By the way, the top surgeons in Texas, there are lots of Puerto Ricans there. And in Florida, they're all over, not to talk about engineers, scientists, they're all over the states, the diaspora we call, and we're losing them. Why are we losing them? Because they're American citizens, and the only thing they have to do to get a better quality of life is to hop on a plane and move to a state.
Okay.
What are we aspiring to become a state?
The question was, if nothing occurs, you see a devastated island.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the permanent solution to Puerto Rico's economic problems, social problems, is equal rights, is equality. All nations who have equal rights have prospered.
Okay, I'm just, the gentleman from the governor's office.
Yes. We see a brighter future for...
Turn that light, Michael.
We see a brighter future for Puerto Rico. We are facing very, very difficult financial situation, actually a crisis. Nonetheless, I understand that we have the capabilities to come across and bring the island to a brighter condition. We need the help that I mentioned before. We need to have an instrument to deal with the debt that we are carrying now. That's why we support extending bankruptcy Chapter 9 to Puerto Rico. That's a fact. But besides that, I understand that all the capabilities are there, that all the instruments are there in Puerto Rico. Then if we reorganize our debt and we can comply with our compromises with holders of our debt, certainly Puerto Rico can come across and enter into a stage of prosperity.
All right. Senator?
Well, the question is quite easy to answer. Just the pastis prologue, says the archives of the United States. The same downward spiral that started in 1970 and which has deepened to the present crisis since 2006 will continue. And that will mean more dependence, more and more dependence, because Puerto Rico cannot exercise the potentiality of its productive capacity. And that will mean that the type of argument you've heard today for statehood, that's more and more, billions of federal funding, the resident commissioner said. Yet you will see more people aspiring for statehood for the wrong reasons. Puerto Rico would then be on the verge of potentially becoming a ghetto state. And that is not the type of future I foresee for my land. We need the political powers in order to develop our own economy and have friendly relationship with the United States and with the rest of the world. If not, more and more dependency, more votes for statehood, because people believe statehood is just what the resident commissioner said. Billions of dollars in funding. Who aspires to that? Will we then have 80% living off food coupons or food checks instead of 50%? That's the future of Puerto Rico if Congress doesn't act soon with what I have, more or less what I have proposed. Let's talk about this. Let's enter into the mutual collaboration process to find a way out for your benefit and for our benefit.
You know, I thank the panel.
Thank you.
You've done well. I will tell you, again, I personally don't believe I said all along, and don't get upset with me, I thought all along, if you're not going to be a state, you become an independent nation. Either one. But the status quo is not working. We've watched this thing. I said 21 years ago, had the only vote on the House floor in Puerto Rico. By one vote, by the way. And I've watched the down spiral, and these are great Americans. And to have this occur, and I'm just sitting here thinking, if something doesn't happen, if we don't do something, there's a possibility of revolution in Puerto Rico. Because you can't have a group of people that has American status and not have the rights that all other Americans have, and have a poverty level which is increasing. This is a challenge to Congress, and the reason we're having these hearings is try to get somebody to start talking about it, because this is a black eye on American soil. And so we're going to continue to do that. I want to thank the panel. You're excused.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So now we'll call up the second panel. I never saw so many fine, honorable governors in my life. I love it. The Honorable Louis Fortunio. The Honorable Carlos Romero, one of my dear friends, both of them were. The Honorable Acevedo Vida, and the Honorable Carmen Yulin Cruz, who is a mayor, and Dr. Miriam Ruiz, former Puerto Rican state senator. And you all know the rules of the game, and as soon as you all get set down and quit talking, we'll start. Good job.
I was on fire.
I mean, you did a good job.
In that direction, I guess. What do you want to?
I'll have Carlos Fidel. Everybody situated, and you photographers get moving. Because you're lined up this way, I am going to call on the Honorable Carlos Romero. And Carlos, welcome. I can remember when I was in a minority and you were in a majority. You fought this battle then, as you're fighting it now. You may have different ideas, but I hope the people of Puerto Rico appreciated your dedication to a cause and your word. Crucially important. So you're up, you're first, you know the rules. I'm pretty lenient, but you do what you have to do. Thank you. Turn that mic on.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good afternoon. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you on behalf of my fellow Puerto Rican Americans who, as American citizens, demand equal rights and equal participation in the democratic process and the government of our nation with our fellow citizens in the 50 states, for all your efforts and support to our long-time quest for equality. Before we continue, I would like to ask you that you ask yourselves this question, and you ask all the members of Congress and the senators to ask themselves these three questions. Do you believe in our Constitution and in our nation's Republican form of government? Do you believe, as our Constitution declares, that all men are created equal? And do you believe that all U.S. citizens should have the right to vote and the right to representation at all levels of government? If you answer yes to the third question, you should support and join our efforts to enact a bill for admission to Puerto Rico as a state. I have dedicated 52 years of my adult life in a quest for equality for the people of Puerto Rico. We have been disenfranchised American citizens for 98 years. We have been denied our right to participate in our nation's democracy, and we have been denied any meaningful participation in our nation's government. We have also been denied the same economic opportunities which have been available to our fellow citizens in the 50 states. We are, as a matter of fact, the world's last colony with more than 1 million inhabitants. Under our Constitution, we are a U.S. territory, but in international geopolitical terms, we are a colony. How can Congress raise the issue of our non-payment of federal income taxes? Wait a minute, sorry, I've missed a page here. I got to go back. In spite of the fact that we have been denied equality and participation in our nation's democratic process ever since we were granted U.S. citizenship in 1917, more than 500,000 Puerto Rican Americans have served in our nation's armed forces, and tens of thousands have shed their blood and lost life and limbs in defense of democracy and in defense of our nation. Puerto Rican Americans have more than earned their right to equal participation in our nation's democratic process, as well as our right to vote for our president and to elect senators and representatives to Congress. We are tired and increasingly upset to have to plead for equality. We are tired and increasingly upset to have to plead and beg for equal terms in federal grants for education for our children. We are tired and pleading and begging for equal terms in federal health care grants to provide health services to our medically indigent. We are tired of pleading and increasingly upset to have to beg for equal terms in federal grants to help families with insufficient income to support their children. And we are tired and increasingly upset being told that we don't qualify for federal funding because we don't pay federal income taxes. How can Congress raise the issue of our non-payment of federal income taxes when you know that we don't have the power to impose federal income taxes on income earned in Puerto Rico? Only Congress has that power. And why doesn't Congress impose federal income taxes on income earned in Puerto Rico? Because Congress knows that if they were to impose federal income taxes on us without granting us equal voting rights and equal rights to elect senators and representatives to Congress, Congress would be invalidating our nation's famous no taxation without representation battle cry to end the colonial relationship with Great Britain. Yes, we are tired and increasingly upset by being denied the right to vote for our president and the right to elect 2 senators and members of Congress that we would be entitled as a state. And we are particularly upset when we see our president and our nation's Congress spending billions of dollars and sending our nation's young men and women into harm's way to bring democracy to countries such as Iraq and Afghanistan, where they don't understand it and don't want it. At the same time, they have kept and are still keeping 3.6 million U.S. citizens disenfranchised, discriminated against, and denied equality under the laws of the nation for no less than 98 years. It is no wonder that the United States is losing credibility and moral authority to preach democracy and to talk about strengthening democracy throughout the world. Our nation is being ridiculed for its hypocrisy in spending billions of dollars and putting young men and women in harm's way to bring democracy to people who don't want it or don't understand it. And deny, at the same time, they deny participation in the nation's democratic process to 3.6 million American citizens because they live in Puerto Rico. I have enclosed with my statement a disc containing some very insightful and satirical criticism of our nation's hypocrisy with Puerto Rican Americans made by British comedian John Oliver. You will not only be enlightened by it, you will also enjoy it very much. And I have also made a short, edited a short time for 3 minutes and 30 seconds that will be available also. Yes, we must stop begging for equality and demand it loud and clear and belligerently if need be. It is way past the time for Congress and the President to have put an end to our disenfranchisement and to our being denied equal opportunities under the laws of our nation. How can anyone who claims to believe in democracy stand idly by without putting an end to the discrimination and the unacceptable inequality between the 3,600,000 American citizens who live in Puerto Rico and the 360 million fellow citizens in the 50 states? Whether we demand equality or not, it is the Congress and the President's duty as leaders of the world's greatest democracy, to put an end to this inequality and denial to participate in our nation's democracy. We have decided to ask for admission as a state. On November 2012, we held a referendum in Puerto Rico where people were asked to vote whether they wanted to remain as a U.S. territory or not. 54% of the voters said no, and 46% said yes. The referendum ballot had a second question who gave the voters three options: to wit, statehood, sovereign commonwealth, or independence. A solid majority of 61% voted in favor of Puerto Rico being admitted as a state. The solid majority vote for statehood in 2012 cannot be ignored. This Congress must address the issue and consider enacting a bill to provide for the admission of Puerto Rico as a state. The bill should establish the conditions and the process, as well as the fiscal and economic arrangements that must be implemented for Puerto Rico to be admitted as a state. The plebiscite or referendum to be held would allow the American citizens who reside in Puerto Rico the opportunity to accept or deny the offer. The ballot would be a simple yes or no vote. All those who oppose statehood could vote no, so they cannot complain that they were not offered an option to exercise their right to vote. Of the 37 territories admitted to the Union since the 13 colonies joined to establish the United States of America, not a single one was disenfranchised for as long a period of time as we have been for 98 years. Not a single territory of the 37 admitted to the Union were deprived of equal economic opportunities and benefits for as long as we have. Not a single territory of the 37 territories who were admitted had as many of its citizens killed or wounded in the nation's wars as we have had in the 98 years since we became American citizens. The awareness of the importance and of the benefits of being a state of the Union has become more obvious to Puerto Rican Americans as they suffer the effects of a worsening economic depression. As they increasingly feel they no longer have reasonable opportunities to get a job or get ahead economically in the island, they are leaving Puerto Rico to look for substantially better opportunities in Florida, Texas, Georgia, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Illinois, Ohio, and many other states. As a result, more and more Puerto Ricans realize that our island's economic future lies in the becoming 51st state. We don't want our sons and daughters and brothers and sisters, our grandchildren, our family, and our friends to leave Puerto Rico. We want them to stay and enjoy the same opportunities available to our fellow citizens in the 50 states. Puerto Ricans have also become more cognizant of the importance of having the right to vote for the president and to elect senators and representatives to Congress in order to participate in our nation's sovereignty. The value to our dignity, to our economic development, and to our self-esteem in having 2 senators and at least 5 members of Congress is much more widely understood and sought after than ever before. Rubén Berríos, the president of the Independence Party, claimed that we needed more political power. Definitely we need more political power, and definitely 2 senators and 5 or 6 congressmen have much more power than the president of Puerto Rico as an independent nation. That and much more is what millions of American citizens in Puerto Rico have been denied for 98 years. The time has come not to beg or plead, but to demand equality. The time has come for Congress and the President to stop looking for excuses and enact a bill to admit Puerto Rico as a state to be submitted to a vote in Puerto Rico. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Carlos, and I have to say you said it very well. Couldn't be said better. I did give you a little more time. I don't want the rest of you to get that idea I can be that lenient, but I might. It all depends how well you're doing. See, I was interested in what he had to say.
Thank you, Chairman. I know you've always been very supportive, and I remember the day of the House when we won by 1 vote.
That's right. Louis, former governor, former colleague, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to see you and so many other friends, and I thank you for your leadership on this issue. The focus of today's hearing is on point because the economic outlook of Puerto Rico is directly linked to the historical necessity of a permanent, constitutionally defined political status. The current economic crisis is a cruel manifestation that territorial status is not a sustainable model for the political economy of America's last large and populous territory. Real people are enduring harsh suffering because Puerto Rico's development is being suppressed by a century of even more severe constraints on growth than 32 other territories experienced before transitioning to a statehood economy. The dire situation that has developed under Commonwealth is demonstrated by graphs that I have provided to the subcommittee. With the exception of a year and a half between 2011 and 2012, Puerto Rico's economy has been in negative territory during the last 9 years. Said situation has turned critical during the last 30 months. We must reverse this accelerating decline and restore fiscal discipline so that people can go back to work and families can recover optimism and prosperity. But Puerto Rico's full potential for economic success and job creation will not be realized until economic uncertainty generated by the island's unresolved political status is replaced by stability and full participation in the U.S. national economy. The 3.5 million U.S. citizens of Puerto Rico get it. That is why a 54% majority voted to end the current status in the plebiscite of 2012. With voter turnout exceeding 78%, more than 61% of voters chose statehood over separate sovereignty nation, with or without a treaty of free association. Results certified by the Puerto Rico Elections Commission confirmed that the total number of votes cast for statehood was greater than the total vote for the current status. That means the current status was defeated on the first ballot question, while statehood won a strong majority on the second ballot question. There is no legal basis for assigning a meaning to blank ballots on the second question in the 2012 vote, while there is a historical precedent for a federally sponsored vote to confirm the results of the 2012 plebiscite. That is why Congressman Pierluisi's bill will empower voters either to confirm or reverse the 2012 vote for statehood. H.R. 727 is fully consistent with the purpose of the 2014 bipartisan legislation in which Congress allocated $2.5 billion for a new status vote. Its objective can be accomplished pursuant to the Pierluisi bill, under which the U.S. Attorney General still must certify the ballot question is legally valid under federal law. Yet, instead of open democratic self-determination, the ideological faction clinging to the status quo insists on obstructing the will of the people so clearly expressed in the 2012 plebiscite. The defenders of the status quo can't even agree on a legally valid non-territorial status themselves. The status proposals made in the past by the Commonwealth Party have not been constitutionally valid, and there is no indication that this time it will be any different. Meanwhile, as time passes, a steady and indeed unprecedented stream of U.S. citizens denied both self-determination and equal economic opportunity in the territory continue the exodus to acquire equal rights secured under our Constitution only through residence in a state. But mass relocation within our national borders should not be required for U.S. citizens in a territory to attain equal rights. People know that in America, equality includes government by consent, and in the U.S., that means voting rights in federal elections secure only for residents of a state under our Constitution. The real meaning of the 2012 vote is that decades of false doctrine on political status options have ended. A majority of your fellow citizens in Puerto Rico now understand that the most sacred fundamental rights of citizenship can be secured permanently and constitutionally only by citizenship in a state of the Union. This modern-day diaspora is a direct reflection of the inequities of the current territorial status and a direct response to the lack of action by Congress to address this flaw in our democratic way of life. Every month, thousands of American citizens relocate from the island, leaving their homes and families behind in search of equal opportunities, equal rights, and economic freedom that can only be attained in one of the 50 states. That is why supporters of statehood are not afraid to put the status we support to the test of an up or down vote. The most logical and democratic way for Congress to know where we stand as Americans is to allow us an up or down vote to confirm or overturn the 2012 results. Thank you, and it's great seeing you again, Mr. Chairman.
I thank you, Governor, and you are good at this. You learned something here. 5 minutes right on the button. God bless you. Acevedo Vila, former Governor of Puerto Rico, former Commissioner, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the invitation. I must start by saying the title of this hearing is quite revealing. Since these procedures are not to analyze any pending legislation, and there is no prospect of legislative action in the near future. On the other hand, The fact that this hearing combines the political relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States and the economic situation in the island is quite revealing too. As far as I can remember, this is the first time any institution of any of the branches of the federal government have implicitly or explicitly recognized the important linkage between these two areas. I have written and submitted a well-thought-out, documented, and factually accurate testimony about the current economic crisis in Puerto Rico and what it means for our political status. I invite you to read it carefully. But since this committee has allowed me only 5 minutes to talk about such a critical point in time for our people, I'm going to use my time today to request something of you and make a plea for my people and my island. And I'm sure that from it, the subcommittee can draft a proper agenda of business to give adequate attention to our current economic situation. While Puerto Rico first produced sugar and then soldiers, the U.S. told the world we were working together. While Puerto Rico provided thousands of our limited acres for military training and an open economy where American business flourished and prospered, you told the world we work together. We have gotten to where we are today together. Yes, a lot of the good and the bad were done by our own hands, but a lot of the good and the bad were done by your hands too. Yes, it doesn't matter how you characterize it, the truth is that we have been in this together. Now, Puerto Rico is in a deep crisis that is threatening essential government services, including safety, education, and healthcare. Our economy has closed the door to hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans that have left their families and homes behind. But contrary to the good old days, this time the U.S. government is keeping distance. In this crisis, you say, now we are not together. I have no problem accepting our fault in the current crisis, but to pretend it is 100% our fault is incorrect and immoral. The economic crisis was worsened by the elimination by Congress of Section 936 of the Internal Revenue Code and by fiscal policies and actions and lack of actions by the U.S. government and of Congress, on this Congress. Our budget bubble happened at the same time that yours, under a monetary policy that fostered billions of dollars of unpayable debt. The Federal Reserve recognized its hand in the 2000 mortgage crisis and set the money printing press to high to solve it. But we have been left behind in the cold. Let me tell you, Congressmen and Congresswomen, in this crisis, we are together. We were together getting it, and we're together in the consequences. Together, we will suffer the dislocations of an uncontrollable migration. Together, we will be hit by rising social programs and needs. Together, we will face financial litigation by revenues creditors looking for every penny and with not even a law to organize the process. No matter what you may think or want to believe, we are in this together. Actually, there is a Supreme Court case solved in 2007, which I quote in detail in my written testimony and is included as an annex, that specifically addresses this issue and state that in a situation where a U.S. territory faces economic insolvency, the U.S. government is responsible and might be liable. Now, I have no doubt that we can solve our crisis and can come out of it stronger if you realize that we are still together and come to the table to work with us. One-sided solutions won't work whether they come from your side or ours. I request of you a joint resolution of Congress asking the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve to roll up their sleeves and do more than just give advice. They need to get involved and be part of the solution. They have the power and the tools and the responsibility to do it. We're willing to sacrifice, but we need a fighting chance. No country, no state, no jurisdiction has gotten out of a crisis like ours without a bankruptcy law, a central bank intervention, or help from outside. Call our relation a bilateral compact or a colonized territory. At this time, it all means one thing. We are in this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Carmen, the mayor of San Juan. beautiful town, great people. Haven't had the privilege of meeting you yet. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Chairman and members of the committee, for the opportunity. Puerto Rico has enjoyed in the past a Commonwealth status responsible for catapulting our economic development. But the world has changed. That which once made us successful now lacks the necessary tools to handle today's reality. Ultimately, any viable political status must provide the necessary economic tools to engage in sustained and equitable economic growth while strengthening our democracy. Puerto Rico has been denied these tools far too long. As long as our options are defined by the powers of this Congress, we will always be at your mercy. The measure of our success will always be limited by the vastness of your control over our affairs. I admit, as did the governor, that our current financial situation has a healthy dose of shared responsibility. For years, we engaged in chronic patterns of unhealthy indebtedness, while you deny us or took away the few tools we have at our disposal. Sir Winston Churchill once said, "Give us the tools to win this war." It is profoundly evident that our political status will determine the tools we have at our disposal to wage and win the economic war we are immersed in. Far too long you have benefited from our inability to reach a consensus in the status question. No more. You can no longer use that as an excuse to neglect your responsibility. Paraphrasing Gandhi, and I quote, "The time has come for you to recognize that you are masters in somebody else's land. The time has come for you to put in motion a true self-determination process which ensures all voices and all options have equal access to the formulation and implementation of the status resolution issue. I come before you as one of the 454,768 Puerto Ricans who in November 2012 voted to transform the present Commonwealth relationship into a non-territorial, non-colonial, free associated state, to request that Congress includes said option in any status-defining process in a manner which is distinguishable from other status options. Said new status is based on the recognition of the sovereignty of the people of Puerto Rico and our inalienable right to choose whichever form of government we see fit. The ELA Soberano will be forged on a compact of association in accordance with international law. We aspire, as the majority of Puerto Ricans, to guarantee for present and future generations the common bond of U.S. citizenship. Of course, any serious self-determination process, and I must clarify I am personally in favor of a status assembly, will take time. However, there are matters which may be addressed immediately. One, we must ensure Resident Commissioner Pedro Pierluisi's bill to include Puerto Rico in Chapter 9 of the U.S. bankruptcy law is swiftly approved so that we have the legal capability to restructure our obligations and pay them in a manner consistent with the well-being of our people. We recently tried to deal with this issue, and the federal court ruled against us. I fully support this bill. Two, give us the authority to enter into commercial agreements with other countries, as well as partially or fully exempt us, just as the Virgin Islands, next to us, from the yoke placed upon us by the Jones Act. You have the power to help Puerto Rico. Now, you must exercise it. You have the moral obligation to end the trite pilgrimage of Puerto Ricans looking for the status question to be resolved. You must move forward. I assure you, you will be met by an alliance of relentless people who know how, have in the past and in the future, once again, overcome adversity. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the good mayor. Now we have Miriam Ramirez, MD, former Puerto Rican state senator.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. Chairman. It has been a privilege to know you and count on your solid and courageous support to advance our struggle to achieve equal rights for the almost 4 million disenfranchised citizens in Puerto Rico. Decades ago, you responded with your full support when more than 350,000 Puerto Ricans petitioned Congress for statehood. Today, you are again giving us an opportunity to obtain our equal rights and obligation as U.S. citizens of this great nation. In my testimony here in Washington on May 22nd of 1986, Congressman Morris Urol was the chairman, and I mentioned our full rights as citizens being the fundamental reason for the poor economic performance of Puerto Rico. Today, I want to focus my testimony on the negative consequences of the federal tax regime that has kept Puerto Rico labeled as a foreign jurisdiction for almost a century. I've been hearing people here talking about the dire life in Puerto Rico and how bad it is, but did you know it's only for a group of people? Because we have a big percentage of people in Puerto Rico who relocate from the United States and can live in Puerto Rico tax-free from Puerto Rico and for the federal government. I hate to get away from my testimony. I will continue reading it, but I'm just too passionate about this issue. In 1996, I've been hearing here about after Section 936 was eliminated, the former Section 936 firms used Puerto Rico's foreign tax status and converted to controlled foreign corporations, CFCs, corporate welfare. However, the CFCs in Puerto Rico are not obligated to create local jobs or to generate any real investment in order to benefit from the federal tax deferral. Using transfer pricing abuses, the CFCs in the island are causing the U.S. Treasury to lose billions in federal tax revenue without creating jobs and investment in the island. The Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations identified one company in Puerto Rico, just one, that has come public that benefits from a tax saving of $22 per million a year per employee, and they have about 170 employees. And most of them, I don't have the statistics, are on part-time jobs. And the U.S. taxpayer is also maybe paying for some of this money that's coming and creating this dependence in Puerto Rico. Also, to exploit the special federal tax code of 933, the pro-state administration adopted, the former one, two laws in 2012, Act 20 and Act 22, to entice millionaires who reside in the 50 states to relocate to Puerto Rico by taxing their corporate profits from exported services at a flat 4% rate and allowing those profits to be paid out to these owners free of Puerto Rico income tax. Bring them here and ask them how they feel living in Puerto Rico is. Thus, the CFC regime in Puerto Rico has become a significant drain of tax revenue and a formidable opponent of statehood for Puerto Rico. Keeping Puerto Rico as a foreign country, as we are coded in the IRS, inside the United States, undermines the U.S. federal tax base and creates unfair competition against local communities in the 50 states and in Puerto Rico. But the truth is that Puerto Rico is governed by the CFC regime and the economic power of the super billionaires who relocate without paying taxes. But that's not the only damage they do. They have the most powerful public relations and army in the world, ready to lobby and fight against anything that endangers this outrageous tax evasion scam. The worst concern for them is that Puerto Rico becomes State of the Union. So they throw out their lobbyists out here, and you will have enclosed in my written testimony a letter from one of the lobbyists precisely after the plebiscite demeaning the results of them. If this was the reason that I find it impossible to fight against the CFCs, if we want to achieve statehood, we have to make the CFCs part of the political status solution. Mr. Chairman, I propose that a statehood bill with the defined terms of admission and a 20-year transition period for maintaining the CFCs in Puerto Rico come out of your committee. There is a precedent for previous statehood bills to include temporary tax benefits, and a transition period was included in Senate Bill 712 of 1990. Please do not hold or pursue any more plebiscites with the various options. We've been there and done that. We now put the ball in your side of the court. Define the admission terms and ask our people. And Mr. Sablan, we are paying for Mr. Cesar Miranda's testimony, even though he's reporting for the governor. He's reporting for one of the status options, so we are basically paying for that.
Thank you, Miriam. I will recognize the ranking member he's going to yield to the good lady from Guam.
Yeah, I'm going to yield to the dean of the, those members of Congress who don't have a vote. She's our dean.
Don't knock it.
Thank you very much to our ranking member, Mr. Sablan from the CNMI. Mr. Chairman, there are 4 of us up here, territorial delegates. One is missing. I think she belongs. That's right. We're now complete, 5 of us. All right, 5 of us. And let me say this, and I want to go on record, as saying that the life of a territorial delegate in the United States Congress is the most frustrating job you would have ever expected it to be. When your colleagues are going over to vote, you're standing there watching them. And they say, why don't you go to vote? I said, well, we don't vote. Oh, that's right. So, ladies and gentlemen, I sympathize in everything that's being said here. Guam is in the same boat. We don't have 3 or 4 million people. We're very small. But when you are not able to vote for the U.S. president as a citizen, and you cannot vote for amendments and final passage in the United States Congress, yet we sit in the committees, that is a frustrating position. And I've been here 13 years. I know all about it. Now, the governor, in his opening testimony, he asked 3 questions. My answer to those 3 questions is yes, yes, yes. You are absolutely right. Or no, would it have been no? What was the question again, Governor? It was yes, right?
Yes, it was a yes.
It was a yes, okay. I want to be sure that I'm on the right side. Thank you, Governor. Yes, yes, yes. All right. I do have a question here for Mr. Vila. Now, I'm interested in your views on the idea of mutual consent. As I understand it, mutual consent between the United States and Puerto Rico is still being discussed among the people of Puerto Rico as part of an opinion for political status. How would mutual consent be formulated to satisfy objections that it is unconstitutional or to meet any objections by DOJ, Department of Justice?
In my written statement and in the documents that included, I go a little bit deeper on that. I think that approach is not the right one, and I do say with total honesty and respect. I think that so far we have been discussing this from a political, legal view, and I think it's about time just to discuss the economic relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States. I firmly believe that statehood economically is not the alternative, and we can go in deep discussing that. It's on my rating statement. I don't want to waste your time, but I firmly believe it's not a good solution for Puerto Rico, for either the United States. I firmly believe independence is not the right economic answer to our situation, and I firmly believe doing nothing, the status quo, is neither also the alternative. I believe that we need to sit down and come up with a new economic arrangement. What's the problem? The problem is that Puerto Rico is and has always been a developing economy. But then we have to play by the rules of the most developed economy in the world, which is the U.S. economy. And when you apply the rules of the most developed economy to a developing economy, you have the problem we have. And if we become a state, it will be even worse, because you will apply the tax rules of the most developing economy to a still developing economy. So in that sense, my approach is, let's reach an agreement on a new kind of economic relationship, and then based on that, let's reach an agreement in what Mayor called Estado Libre Asociado Soberano, a new political arrangement, clearly non-colonial and clearly non-territorial.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, thank you for being so supportive of our issues, and Ranking Member Sablan, thank you for the time.
Mr. Chairman, can I address myself with some of the things that he's
You got 21 seconds, and I got to let her ask questions.
And I said, could I address myself to some of the things that he has mentioned about the economy?
I will, we'll get that next
Okay.
time. Okay. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, want to welcome the panel of very distinguished public servants. I see Governor Romero, who was a colleague of my dad when they served together as governors of American Samoa and Puerto Rico, respectively. Governor Luis Fortunio, a former member of this body and a colleague on the RNC. Warm welcome to all of you. When I spoke in this committee room at a hearing early this year, I used the term colonialism by another name. Well, a three-judge panel gave it another name, cultural imperialism. That Federal Court of Appeals just rejected the argument lawyers made in a case claiming the national citizenship clause in the Constitution applies in American Samoa and all other unincorporated U.S. territories. So once again, the courts have confirmed that U.S. nationals in American Samoa and U.S. nationals from Puerto Rico and the 3 other unincorporated territories are required to relocate to a state of the Union to secure full and equal rights and duties of U.S. citizenship. That means full and equal rights of national citizenship, including the fundamental right of government by consent through voting rights in the federal elections, are guaranteed only through citizenship in a state rather than a territory. So for residents of all 5 unincorporated territories who don't move to a state, the status of a U.S. national in American Samoa and a U.S. citizen in a territory is constitutionally the same, with only those rights under the Constitution and federal law confirmed by Congress in federal statutes enacted under the territorial power. I have a question for Governor Fortunio. Given the predicament for the territories and for Congress due to the twisted saga of unincorporated territory status, do you agree that the best path forward is for Congress to support self-determination for each territory based on status options that are legally valid, politically feasible, and compatible with the freely expressed wishes of a majority in votes held whenever each territory decides to seek a change of status? And also, would you care to comment on the consistent federal court rulings that confirm full and equal rights of U.S. national citizenship that include federal voting rights are attainable only through state citizenship, and what it means for those citizens in Puerto Rico who democratically have expressed a desire for a new status with equal rights of national citizenship that include federal voting rights?
Well, thank you, and I commend you for raising this very important question, and actually it is an honor to see you sitting up there in the dais. As you very well state, actually there is a situation that actually was court-created of a so-called unincorporated territory, and what it means is that it grants Congress carte blanche to essentially do whatever it wants with the U.S. citizens residing in the territories. Initially, it was only applicable to territories with non-citizens, but actually it has been extended and applied to territories where American citizens reside, American citizens that actually have served with valor and courage in every single war, in our case, since 1917. The only way to address this situation whereby our constitutional rights are never the same if we live in a territory is to either move to one of the 50 states or become a state. And in order to attain that, there ought to be, in my opinion, number one, a process by which majority rules in the territory in terms of the terms that are acceptable, but also that in terms that are acceptable to Congress, because Congress has the ultimate word in this matter, and that is why H.R. 727 makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Resident Commissioner, you're up.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Listening to Governor Acevedo Vila, and former member of Congress, I just want to raise a question to see if you can explain to me what kind of status you envision in Puerto Rico's future. What's your position, specific position on status? Because I frankly do not get it. And I'll be respectful. You know very well the way Congress works. Congress approves bills every day, we're in session, that apply or not to Puerto Rico based on its power under the Territory Clause of the U.S. Constitution. The Supreme Court of the United States, ever since the beginning of the 20th century, decided that Puerto Rico is an unincorporated territory, meaning that Puerto Rico could become either a state or a nation. Two choices, statehood or nationhood. Yet, we are a territory. We have our own constitution, good constitution, by the way. We're called the Commonwealth, but as you well know, that's the situation. Any day, here, they can deal with us, and we have no vote. We have a say, but no vote. Now, looking at the future, what do you want Puerto Rico to be? Do you want Puerto Rico to be recognized as a sovereign nation and then get into a compact or treaty with the U.S., providing for the economic benefits you were talking about? Is that what you want? Or you want Puerto Rico to continue being a territory as it is, and then keep trying to get a better treatment in the laws that Congress approves on a daily basis?
Resident Commissioner, I just said that for me, status quo is not the alternative, and doing nothing with status is not the alternative. And I also said that what we need to get is to a new economic relationship, which is described in many of my essays. One of them is included as an annex to my written statement. And in that sense, what I think is we need to establish a new relationship based on a compact in which we clarify the powers of Congress and we clarify the powers that the people and the government of Puerto Rico will have. And to me, this is a political will situation, not a legal question. Actually, I bet for any of you to look into the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and read to me the clause where it talks about unincorporated territory. It's nowhere. It's nowhere. The Constitution only talks about territories. But when the U.S. government came to the realization that they had Puerto Rico, back then Philippines, many of the territories, but that they were not on the path towards statehood, they had a political situation. And then a new theory came to accommodate that new reality, and now we're called unincorporated territories. But that's not on the Constitution. There's nowhere in the Constitution. So to me, what we need is to reach a political will for a new economic relationship. And I firmly believe that the best alternative for the people of Puerto Rico and for the United States is what we have called sovereign Commonwealth, Estado Libre Asociado Soberano, where you clarify the powers of Congress and you clarify the powers of the people of Puerto Rico. And for me, the most important ones are the one has to do with economic development.
Would that be a territory, or would that be a sovereign nation in association with the U.S.?
A new relationship. The same way that before there was only territories, and then after that, it was accepted to have unincorporated territory. I think what we have to reach is a political and economic agreement, and then we'll deal with the legal structure.
And would Puerto Ricans continue to be American citizens, even if they're residing in a sovereign nation as opposed to the United States?
It's a matter of political will. It's a matter of political will.
We'll continue this, Mr. Malfa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just had a question I wanted to throw out there. on the idea of Puerto Rican bonds that might be go into bankruptcy. Yeah, I'm trying to work through this a little bit here. I'm trying to get familiar here, but it's a possibility that previous bonds could end up in bankruptcy. And what would that mean for investors? And then going forward, what kind of confidence would anybody have in future bonds going forward? And then how would this lay over with how things look with Greece? With how would that differ from the country of Greece? With those governments defaulting, what kind of confidence would investors be able to have with Puerto Rico at that point?
Should I, Mr. Chairman, should I give it a try?
He just put it on. Anybody
okay,
wants to,
sure.
anybody wants to answer it?
I'll be happy to, of course.
Yeah, or not.
And some of the members of this committee know my background. I slash expenses by 20%. I'm proud to be a fiscal conservative. But I can tell you that I believe that the rules in the country should apply in the same way for creditors and debtors across the country, regardless of whether you're dealing with the credit of Detroit, California, Florida, or Puerto Rico. And in that sense, I believe that certainty is required. Some people have stated in the past, well, if now you implement Chapter 9, or you allow Chapter 9 to actually benefit both creditors and debtors of debt issued by Puerto Rico, you'll be changing the rules of the game. That's exactly what this Congress does every day, and that's exactly what investors in every type of paper face every single day. Congress changes rules, especially tax rules, every single day. So in that sense, nothing special, but I strongly believe in actually that there ought to be fiscal responsibility on the part of the territory, but there ought to be certainty, certain rules that apply to debtors and creditors, and Chapter 9 applies in the 50 states. It ought to apply across the country, including the territories.
May I just add that what will happen is the same thing that happened in Detroit. The same thing. You have an orderly process to deal with that situation. We're talking about municipalities or instrumentalities of the central government that might go bankruptcy. So in that sense, you have a very recent experience, Detroit. So that's the same. It's basically allowing those corporations, those instrumentalities of the government of Puerto Rico to use that tool. And I just want to clarify also that the reason Resident Commissioner's Pervisi bill is so important is because the local legislature in Puerto Rico approved a local law that was declared unconstitutional by a federal court. That case is pending in the First Circuit, Boston Court of Appeals. We'll see what happened. But the problem is that we don't get action from Congress, and then when the local legislature decided to somehow act, then we have a federal court saying you cannot do that. So I don't know of any other place in the world that don't have rules.
And that feels like stated already, right? If the court's stopping you from doing things, but
I missed you. Sorry.
Can I make a statement?
We don't change tax rules every day around here. We've had a package that's been very difficult to do tax reform around here, so it's not as easy as maybe it's made out to be. But go ahead, sir.
We are very concerned, people are concerned about the bondholders, and they think of the bondholders as wealthy bondholders from the nation, from the U.S. A lot of the bondholders, and I don't know how much of a percentage, but a large percentage, are poor people in Puerto Rico, retirees, and some of the retirement funds in Puerto Rico have invested heavily in Puerto Rican bonds because they had faith in the government of Puerto Rico. So they would also be subject to not only the bondholders in Wall Street, but the individual bondholders and family bondholders in Puerto Rico will be affected by anything that is done. And if something is done in an orderly fashion, it's the best way to do it. If nothing is done and the whole thing, the roof falls down on everyone, then everybody's going different ways and going to court procedures for years and years and years. That's why it's being sought. Nobody expected this ever to happen. And one of the problems is that in Puerto Rico, there's been as a colony, we have created a dependency. And you've heard him speak about how he wants to have U.S. citizenship and not participate in the democratic process. How can anybody that says that they believe in democracy and that they believe they want their U.S. citizenship do not want to participate in the democratic process of the nation that they're citizens with?
Yeah,
Somebody's telling a lie or does not understand what democracy is and does not understand what U.S. citizenship means, because they want U.S. citizenship, but they don't want to vote. Oh, that's bad. To have representation in the government of our nation is prejudicial. I mean, how can that argument ever even be accepted? I wouldn't have the gall to go any place and say, I believe in democracy, but I don't want to have the right to vote or the right representation in my nation.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry, sir. I'm going to have to. Okay, thank you. Just be careful on asking for statehood, because you might get more EPA. This is the resources. You might get more EPA than you ever asked for, because my resources we can't get at in California anymore, do those guys?
The ranking member.
Yeah. On the EPA part, you get it whether you have, whether you are an outlying area. You could be in Midway and get EPA, trust me. Would it be possible for the people of Puerto Rico to come together and figure this out themselves, and then come to Congress and tell us what it is you want? I have learned in my short 7 years in Congress here that you don't ask a question unless you know the answer. If you're really going to look to Congress for guidance here, poor people, poor you. Seriously, is there a way, for you to finally come together?
With the gentleman deal.
And I yield to the gentleman from Puerto Rico.
See, the problem, Mr. Sablan, is that as I was saying, in Alaska, they held a referendum, a plebiscite, years before they became a state, and 57% chose statehood. And 43% said they didn't want it. It always happens. In Alaska, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chairman, but I believe there's people who still want Alaska to be independent. Imagine. And
primarily because of the EPA.
The same happens in Texas. Texas was an independent nation before it joined the Union. So you will always have different opinions and different factions. So to ask Puerto Ricans, just why don't you agree, all of you, it's just like an easy way out.
Reclaiming my time. I'm just suggesting, I'm naive, that you are also Puerto Rico, just like in the Northern Mariana Islands. Politics is something we discuss breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I reclaim, Mr. Chairman, and this is an interesting, I hope I didn't offend anyone, and if I did, then that's your problem, not mine. But I'm enlightened, and I'm going through the same growing pains, although you guys Puerto Rico has been in this since 1902 or 1908.
1898, we became a territory.
1898. Well, see, that's what happened when that war broke out in Cuba. The United States won the war. They kept Puerto Rico and sold us to the Germans. And that's where we left off. But now I'm so glad we're together again. See, it's so wonderful. The world goes around in circles, and in 100 years, we'll probably be down there, and you're up here because you're a state. But I will tell you this much. There's so many times when I'm trying to get something done in Congress, and I pray if only Puerto Rico were a state and they'd be out of my way. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
May I react to his comment? I know it was not a question, but don't be optimistic in terms of, and I think that we all agree. But I'm going to say two things in terms of things that are happening and have been shown here. For example, Pierluisi's bill for Chapter 9 has bipartisan support in Puerto Rico, and that's very rare. So you have stateholders, pro-Commonwealth there, all sectors supporting that. There has been created a coalition to deal with the health issue. Medicare, Medicaid also with bipartisan support. That's new. Probably 10 years ago it would have been impossible. That's why my presentation was basically about the economic crisis. I think you have a responsibility and a unique opportunity. I'm not talking only about Congress. It has to do also with the federal government, the executive branch. This crisis is going to get complicated, and as I said, and I repeat it, we're in this together. And the solution to this crisis needs the U.S. government to come to the table and be part of that solution. And I think on that, we might be able also to get some kind of agreement beyond political parties in Puerto Rico.
I want to thank everybody at this table. I may have to leave here in a moment if my good vice chairman, because we have a vote on. Miriam, what is, and this is for all of you, how does this tax structure work for the bigger companies, pharma, and I guess I don't know who else is down? How does that work, and what benefit does it bring to the Puerto Rico?
I think it hurts Puerto Rico. Pardon? I think it hurts Puerto Rico, Mr. Chairman. I think that it's been a long time that I've been saying, if we reduce this 90% tax credit to the corporations, to basically the pharmaceuticals, and down to 70%, instead of paying 4%, they would pay 12%. It would mean about $3 to $4 billion more in revenues for the government of Puerto Rico, and we could start solving this economic situation. But the incumbents now, the government, the governor and the Popular Party, will never do that, because when the campaign comes along, the lobbyists and the and lawyers from these old corporations, they raise a lot of money for them, and that's
what I'm leading up to. That it's just not pharma, there's other ones there, but where would that would bring money into the Puerto Rican economy?
Yeah.
Because right now, some of these companies don't even have workers from Puerto Rico, do they?
Yeah, yes, they do.
But Miriam, wait a minute, Miriam, go ahead.
Well, I have spent a lot of years now looking at this, because when I first started coming up here, I thought it was the independentistas who were obstructing the deal, and I was bumping into these lobbyists who were actually...
I don't knock lobbyists all the time. I want you to know something. They do inform people, but because you're basically all lobbyists sitting at that table.
I realize that.
No, okay, so...
What I mean to say is that I found these pro-corporation, these particular type of corporation lobbyists interfering with the work that we were doing up here to try to convince Congress to move on this issue. And since then, the GAO has produced, I have introduced that and links in my testimony, has produced evidence that this is one of the biggest tax evasion scams in the whole world. Almost every country is looking at this very seriously, and I have met with people in the Finance and the Ways Committee, and they're very concerned about the fact that all these this is in the papers every day, $1 trillion of money out there in foreign countries. But here's the problem. We are coded as foreign in the IRS. I don't know if the other territories are, but we are coded as foreign under Section 933, which is what has allowed the benefits for these people who relocate to Puerto Rico, for these corporations. And I just have the numbers from Microsoft because they came public, but I know for a fact that this is happening also with the farmers and everybody else. And the contrast is, here we're talking about how Puerto Rico is sinking in bankruptcy, how Puerto Rico, do you think the people of Puerto Rico don't see that? That's why they're leaving.
Okay, stop right there. I just want to, what I'm looking for, if that is happening, because we have another bill that's been introduced by, I believe, gentleman Duncan, is it Duncan? South Carolina, that wants a congressional control board. Now, does anybody there support that?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
would you yield?
Yes.
It's not a bill. He wrote a letter, and some are advocating for that. I should say for the record that I oppose that.
Okay.
I mean, Puerto Rico, as we have discussed, we have a Republican form of government, a constitution blessed by this Congress. And so unless you suspend the effectiveness of our Constitution, which makes no sense, you don't appoint the Financial Control Board to take over Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, with all due respect to the District of Columbia, is not the District of Columbia. It is not the city of New York. We are a territory, and there's case law from the Supreme Court saying that we deserve deference in terms of our own self-government for our local.
I'm about ready to run out of time, but here's what I'm looking for. As you know, I'm a proponent, because it's probably the simplest solution to all have a vote. Just say you're going to be a state and be a state. And then that may not happen, because this can is got a long string on it. I have problems with the Congress. You know, I've, like I said, been in this business for a long time and watched the attitude, which is bad. We don't need a bunch of foreigners, by the way, back in the United States. We don't need 2 senators that are new. We don't need 5 Democrat congressmen, which is not true, by the way. You'd probably end up all being Republicans, all due respects. Because I lived through that. We're all Democrats, now we're all Republicans. But I do think we have to, and my job is to try to keep this alive and moving, because somewhere we have to solve this economic problem. And I personally think a statehood would do it. I may be wrong. But we also have to consider the fact that maybe we change the tax law so we can pick those monies up a little bit, so we can be more solvent. But the present system, the status quo, is not working. I said this 21 years ago, and I want to be alive 20 more. God help you guys if I'm alive 20 more years. But the fact is, I'd like to see this not be a black eye on American citizens, and Puerto Rico can be accepted as equal. And I do apologize, and I want to thank the panel. We have a vote on, and for those delegates that don't have to vote, you got it made. You have to run over there and have a vote and miss a vote. You know, if you miss a vote, they say you committed a crime. If there's no other questions,
Mr. Chairman?
I adjourn. Yes, ma'am.
May the territories take over this
Oh,
committee
yeah,
since
absolutely.
you leave?
I've offered to her if she wants to do it. You know, are you through? Okay, we're adjourned.
Thank you.